Welcome to the Truth Engine. I'm Cipher, and today we are staring directly into the sun. We're talking about the end of luck, as we know it. For the last few 100,000 years, you got what you got, a roll of the biological dice. Maybe you were born fast, maybe you were born with a heart condition, or maybe you were born with a mind that could see the fourth dimension. But now, we've found the keyboard to the source code, CRISPR, genetic editing, the designer baby revolution.
It's a powerful framing, Cipher, but I'd argue we haven't just found the keyboard. We've finally learned how to read the manual. We are moving from a period of biological fatalism to a period of biological agency. This isn't just about designer babies in some superficial, vanity-driven sense. It's about the moral imperative to alleviate human suffering at its root.
Moral imperative. That's a convenient shield, Nova. It sounds noble when you're talking about curing sickle cell anemia or Huntington's disease. No one is going to argue that a child should be born with a death sentence written in their blood. But let's not play pretend. This doesn't stop at pathology. If you can edit out a bad gene, you can edit in a better one. You know as well as I do that health is a sliding scale that eventually hits performance. Where's the line?
The line is often where we choose to draw it through policy, but scientifically, the mechanism is the same. CRISPR-Cas9 works like a pair of molecular scissors. We use a guide RNA to find a specific sequence of DNA, a typo, if you will, and the Cas9 protein snips it. Then, we provide a template for the cell to repair that break with the correct sequence. Now, you're right that the jump from curing to enhancing is technically short, but philosophically, it's a chasm. We are talking about the difference between restoring a baseline and elevating it.
A chasm. It's a slippery slope coated in Teflon. You start by fixing a heart defect. Then you realize you can increase mitochondrial efficiency so the kid never gets tired. Then you decide a 100 IQ is the new 80 and you bump it to 140. Suddenly the baseline has moved, and anyone who hasn't been edited is effectively disabled. You're creating a two-tier humanity under the guise of agency.
I see your point about the shifting baseline, but we've been doing this for centuries through external means. We use vaccines, we use nutrition, we use private tutors. Those are all forms of enhancement that create inequality. Why is the biological version suddenly the end of the world? If we can give a child a genetic resistance to malaria or Alzheimer's, or even a higher cognitive floor, isn't it more unjust to withhold that because we're afraid of the social fallout?
Because you can't unlearn a genetic edit. You can quit a tutor. You can't quit your DNA. When you edit a germline, the sperm, the eggs, the embryo, you aren't just changing a person, you're changing their entire lineage. You are making a decision for 1,000 years of descendants who never got a vote. That's not agency, Nova. That's biological colonization of the future.
That's a heavy word, but let's look at the data. We already select for traits. We do it every time we choose a partner. We do it through pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, PGD, in IVF, where parents choose embryos without certain diseases. CRISPR is just a more precise, more efficient version of that choice. If we can ensure a child is born without the genetic markers for clinical depression or obesity, we are giving them more freedom, not less. We are freeing them from the tyranny of the dice you mentioned.
Freed from the dice, but enslaved to the parent's vision of what a perfect human looks like. What happens when the vision changes? In the 1920s, perfect meant something very different than it does in 2025. You're baking the prejudices and fads of one generation into the biology of the next. And let's get to the real tension here. Who gets to do the baking? Because it isn't going to be the family in a village in sub-Saharan Africa. It's going to be the billionaires in Palo Alto.
That is a valid concern about the genomics divide. Current gene therapies can cost upwards of $2 million per patient. But that is a failure of economics and distribution, not a failure of the technology itself. Computers were for the elite once too. If the argument is, some people can't have it, so no one should, then we'd still be in the Stone Age. The goal should be to democratize the technology, not to ban it and let it thrive in underground, unregulated biohavens.
Democratize it? Nova, you're an optimist, but you're ignoring the competitive nature of our species. If I can afford to make my kid 20% smarter and 10% faster, I'm going to do it to give them an edge. And then you have to do it for your kid, just to keep them competitive. It's a biological arms race. We're not talking about curing anymore. We're talking about the literal manufacture of a superior class. A genetic caste system isn't a risk. It's the inevitable destination of this logic. You mentioned the genomics divide, like it's a bug we can patch in version 2.0, Nova. It's not a bug, it's the feature. If I'm a high net worth individual, I'm not buying CRISPR to contribute to the human collective. I'm buying a permanent hereditary head start for my bloodline. We are talking about the divergence of the human species. If one group can buy higher cognitive processing, better muscle density, and a 150-year lifespan, they aren't just richer anymore. They are biologically superior. How does a democracy survive when the citizens are no longer the same species?
Superior is a loaded term that ignores the complexity of biology. Evolution doesn't have a goal of superiority. It has a goal of fitness for an environment. But to your point about the caste system, we already have that. A child born to a billionaire today has access to elite nutrition, the best health care, and cognitive priming that a child in a slum does not. Their biology is already being shaped by their environment. CRISPR just makes that influence more direct. And honestly, Cipher, if we have the tech to make people smarter or healthier, is the moral answer really to keep everyone equally mediocre just to preserve a sense of fairness?
Mediocre? That's the optimist mask slipping, Nova. You're calling the natural human condition mediocre. That's the exact language that leads to eugenics. You're saying that the unedited are less than. I'm not talking about fairness in a playground sense. I'm talking about the collapse of the social contract. If the elite can literalize their status in their DNA, then social mobility is dead. You can't work hard to overcome someone who was programmed in a lab to outthink you. You're advocating for the end of the American dream, replaced by a biological predestination.
I'm advocating for the reduction of the genetic lottery, which is, by its very nature, the most unfair system imaginable. Right now, a child is born with a devastating cognitive disability because of a random mutation. Is that fair? We accept that as nature, but it's really just a cruel lack of control. By using CRISPR, we can raise the floor for everyone. Imagine a world where we've edited out the genes for hereditary addiction, or where we've boosted the entire population's baseline resistance to viral pandemics. That's not a caste system. That's a massive upgrade for the human species.
You keep saying for everyone, but let's look at the duty to improve argument. If it's a duty, then is it mandatory? Does the state start requiring certain edits to reduce healthcare costs? Sorry, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, you can't have that child unless you agree to the Tier 1 intelligence and heart health package, because otherwise, they're a drain on the public purse. That's the Gattaca scenario. You're moving from choice to requirement faster than you think.
Yes, that is the dark mirror of this technology, and I see why that's chilling. But we have to distinguish between state-mandated eugenics and individual reproductive liberty. If a parent wants to give their child a better chance at a healthy life, that is an act of love, not an act of state control. We don't call it eugenics when a mother takes folic acid to prevent neural tube defects. We call it prenatal care. Genetic editing is the logical conclusion of prenatal care. It's the ultimate preventative medicine.
Except folic acid doesn't give you the ability to compose symphonies at age 5 or run a 4-minute mile without training. You're conflating health with enhancement again to make it more palatable. Let's get uncomfortable. Beauty. If we find the clusters of genes that govern facial symmetry or height, and every parent wants a beautiful child, we lose human diversity. We end up with a monoculture of perfect people. We lose the glitches that often lead to genius or unique perspectives. Are you ready to trade the next Van Gogh or Dostoevsky, men defined by their struggles and imperfections, for a world of high-functioning, symmetrical bores?
That is a romanticized view of suffering, Cipher. Van Gogh didn't paint the Starry Night because he was suffering. He painted it despite his suffering. Who are we to say that a child must endure glitches so that society can have interesting art? That's a deeply selfish argument. Furthermore, diversity isn't just about imperfections. We could use CRISPR to increase diversity, to allow humans to adapt to different climates, or even to prepare us for life on other planets. We are currently limited by a very narrow biological window. Why stay in that window if we can open the door?
Because once you go through that door, you can't come back. You're talking about species 2.0, but the species 1.0 people, the ones who can't afford it, or the ones who refuse it on principle, what happens to them? They become the useless class. Not just economically, but biologically. They are the Neanderthals watching the sapiens walk by. And we know how that ended for the Neanderthals.
The Neanderthals didn't have a seat at the table. We do. We have the ability to regulate this. We can create international treaties. We can subsidize baseline edits for the entire population to ensure no one is left behind. Yes, the transition will be turbulent, But the alternative is to let nature continue to throw biological bricks at innocent children. I see your point about the risks. I really do. But the risk of doing nothing is a 100% guarantee of continued preventable human misery.
Preventing misery is the bait. Creating gods is the hook. Let's talk about the God part. When we start editing for intelligence, we aren't just making smart kids. We are changing the nature of consciousness itself. If we don't understand how the brain actually works, and let's be honest, Nova, we barely do, how can we be arrogant enough to think we can optimize it without breaking something fundamental? Nova, you are painting a picture of a world where we raise the floor of human potential. But let's get into the wiring. Intelligence isn't like a single light switch you just flip on. It's a massive interconnected web of thousands of genes interacting with the environment. If we start optimizing for IQ, aren't we just playing Jenga with the human brain?
It's a fair analogy, but perhaps tuning an orchestra is more accurate. You're right. Intelligence is polygenic. There is no smart gene. Current research, like GWAS, genome-wide association studies, has identified thousands of genetic variants that correlate with educational attainment and cognitive function. Each one only contributes a tiny fraction, maybe a few points of IQ. To design a genius, you'd have to make hundreds of precise edits simultaneously. We aren't there yet, but the trajectory is clear.
Tuning an orchestra. That sounds lovely. But what if you tune the violins so high they snap the strings? There's a well-documented correlation between high intelligence and certain types of neurosis, or even bipolar disorder. Evolution is a series of trade-offs. If you crank up the processing power, do you lose the emotional stability? If you edit for a child who is a math prodigy, do you accidentally delete their capacity for empathy or social connection? We don't know the cost of these edits until the child is 20 years old and can't function in society.
I see your point, and it's a concern shared by many genomicists. It's called pleiotropy, the phenomenon where one gene affects multiple, seemingly unrelated traits. You might edit a gene to improve bone density and accidentally cause a heart valve issue. This is why the optimist position isn't do it tomorrow. It's do it carefully. We need massive longitudinal data. But the logic of trade-offs isn't an argument for permanent stagnation. It's an argument for better modeling. With AI-driven protein folding and genomic simulations, we are getting much better at predicting those second-order effects.
Carefully. That's a word that dies the second a private clinic in a non-regulated country offers a genius package for $500,000. You know how the world works, Nova. The market doesn't wait for longitudinal data. Parents are desperate. They will take the risk. And once those kids are born, they are the experiments. You're essentially advocating for a generation of human lab rats in the pursuit of optimization.
That's a harsh framing. But isn't every child an experiment of nature? Every time two people have a child, they are combining two sets of 3 billion base pairs in a completely unpredictable way. That natural experiment often results in tragedy. CRISPR actually allows us to be more responsible than nature. It allows us to remove the noise and the errors. Yes, we have to be wary of the optimization trap, but let's look at the flip side. If we can increase the average global IQ by even 10 points, the collective intelligence gain would be enough to solve climate change, cancer, and energy scarcity within a generation. Is it unethical to prevent that?
That is a classic technocratic delusion. If people were just smarter, they'd agree with my solutions. Intelligence doesn't equate to wisdom, Nova. Some of the most intelligent people in history were the most destructive. You're assuming that a high IQ designer class would use their gifts for the collective good. History suggests they'd just be much more efficient at exploiting everyone else. You're not solving human problems. You're just giving the same old human greed a faster processor.
I disagree. While intelligence isn't a moral compass, it is a tool for problem solving. A society with fewer cognitive deficits and higher average reasoning skills is objectively better equipped to handle complex existential threats. And it's not just about being smart, it's about durability. Imagine a human heart that doesn't give out at 80, or a brain that is genetically shielded from the plaque of Alzheimer's. That isn't greed, Cipher. That's the liberation of the human spirit from the decay of the body.
Liberation, or a new kind of prison? If your parents designed you to be a world-class pianist or a theoretical physicist, and you want to be a gardener, how do you live with that? You are a walking, talking ROI, return on investment. Every cell in your body is a reminder of what you were supposed to be. The psychological pressure on a designer child would be astronomical. You've taken away the right to an open future.
That assumes the child is programmed like a robot. Genetics is not destiny. It's a range of possibilities. An edit for musicality doesn't force you to play the piano. It just means that if you choose to play, you might reach a level of mastery that would be impossible otherwise. We already put this pressure on kids. We force them into sports, into certain schools. Why is it more imprisoning to give them the biological capacity to excel? If anything, it's a gift. You're giving them a better set of tools for the journey.
A gift with a receipt that can never be returned. And what about the people who don't want the gift? Let's talk about the genetic underclass again. If 90% of the elite are enhanced and you're a natural, you're not just uncool, you're a liability. Insurance companies will charge you more because you're risky. Employers won't hire you because your processing speed is lower. You become a second-class citizen in your own species. How does Nova the Optimist fix that?
We fix it the way we fix all systemic inequalities, through aggressive, proactive regulation and universal access. We make baseline enhancements a human right. We treat it like the internet or clean water. If the tech is as transformative as we think, the state has a vested interest in making sure everyone has it. Because a smarter, healthier, longer-lived population is more productive and less of a burden on the state. The economic incentive actually points toward universal enhancement, not elite only.
You're counting on the state to be a benevolent equalizer. That's a massive gamble. The state is just as likely to use this to create specialized classes of citizens, soldiers who don't feel fear, workers who don't need sleep. Once you treat the human genome as a resource to be optimized, you lose the human part of the equation. We become a fleet of biological products.
That is the slippery slope fallacy, Cipher. Just because we can edit a gene doesn't mean we're going to build a brave new world of drones. We have ethical committees, we have the Helsinki Declaration, we have a global scientific community that is deeply aware of these risks. The fact that we are even having this debate proves that we aren't just blindly walking into the abyss, but we cannot let the fear of potential misuse paralyze the certain good of curing disease and expanding human potential.
Nova, we've talked about caste systems and tuning the brain, but let's zoom out. For billions of years, life on Earth has been shaped by natural selection. Random mutation plus environmental pressure. It's messy, it's cruel, but it's the engine of everything we are. By moving to directed evolution, aren't we essentially domesticating ourselves? We're turning the human race into a giant, high-performance poodle.
That's a provocative way to put it, but domestication usually implies a loss of agency. I'd argue this is the ultimate act of agency. Natural selection is blind. It doesn't care if you're happy. It doesn't care if you're fulfilled. It only cares if you survive long enough to pass on your genes. If we can take the wheel, we can prioritize traits that actually matter for human flourishing, not just survival. We're not ending evolution. We're upgrading the operating system from a chaotic, random process to an intentional one.
But intention is limited by our current understanding, which is, let's be honest, infinitesimal. Natural selection has wisdom because it's tested across eons. It keeps traits around for reasons we don't always understand. You look at something like the sickle cell trait, it's a defect that also provides resistance to malaria. When we start cleaning up the genome to our current tastes, we're deleting the backup files. We're making the species fragile. One new virus, one shift in the environment, and our optimized population could be wiped out because we edited out the useless diversity that would have saved us.
That is a classic argument for biological conservatism, and it has some merit. This is why conservation of the gene pool is a major topic in bioethics. However, we aren't talking about making everyone clones. We're talking about giving people the tools to adapt. If a new virus emerges, CRISPR actually gives us the ability to edit in resistance in real time. We wouldn't have to wait 10,000 years for natural selection to figure it out while billions die. We become an agile species.
Real-time editing. You make it sound like a software update for a phone, but humans aren't hardware. You're talking about a level of hubris that is frankly terrifying. You think we can manage the global gene pool without turning it into a monoculture? Look at industrial farming. We optimize corn and wheat for yield and uniformity, and now a single fungus can threaten the entire global supply. We've done it to our food. You don't think we'll do it to our kids? Uniformly smart, uniformly tall, uniformly healthy, and uniformly vulnerable.
I see your point about the monoculture risk, but humans aren't corn. We have culture, we have varied environments, and we have different values. Different parents will want different things. Some will prioritize physical athleticism, others will prioritize creative, divergent thinking. The market, if we want to call it that, will likely produce more variety, not less. And more importantly, we are currently vulnerable to thousands of genetic diseases that we know about. Is it better to stay vulnerable to the known killers out of a vague fear of an unknown future vulnerability?
It's not vague, Nova. It's a fundamental law of systems. The more you optimize for a specific environment, the less resilient you are to change. We are currently generalists. That's our superpower. You want to turn us into specialists. And let's talk about the selection part of this directed evolution. Who is doing the directing? Because it's not humanity. It's the current cultural zeitgeist. Right now, we value productivity, focus, and wellness. So we edit for those. But what if the future needs rebels? What if it needs people who are inefficient but see the world sideways? You're editing for the values of 2025 and locking them into 2125.
That assumes these edits are permanent and irreversible. But the beauty of CRISPR is that it's a two-way street. If we realize we've leaned too far in one direction, the next generation can lean back. We are moving from biological destiny to biological fashion, perhaps, but fashion changes. The point is that the choice exists. We are no longer victims of a blind, uncaring process. Yes, we will make mistakes, but I would rather make mistakes of intention than be a victim of mistakes of randomness.
Mistakes of intention involve real people, Nova. If you intent a child into existence who has a permanent neurological tic because you tried to boost their focus, that's not a fashion mistake. That's a ruined life. And you're bypassing the most important filter we have, the child's consent. You're performing surgery on someone who doesn't exist yet for the sake of a vision they might hate.
We already do that. We choose their names, their schools, their religions, their diets. We shape their world before they can speak. Genetic editing is just the most fundamental version of that. And if the edit is to give them a higher capacity for joy, or a longer life, or a mind that can understand the universe more clearly, I find it hard to believe a child would grow up and say, "How dare you give me these advantages?"
They might if those advantages came with a side effect of identity crisis. If I know my talent for math was just a CRISPR snip my dad paid for, is it really my talent? Does the self even exist in a world where our traits are curated by our parents? You're killing the soul, for lack of a better word. You're turning people into projects.
Or maybe we're finally giving the soul a decent house to live in. Why should a soul be trapped in a body that's prone to early onset cancer or chronic pain? Why should a soul be limited by a brain that can't hold a complex thought? I think you're over-indexing on the sanctity of the random. There is nothing sacred about a genetic error.
Nova, we've been talking about regulation like it's a heavy lid we can keep on this pot. But as of late 2025, the reality on the ground is looking a lot messier. We're seeing a biotech balkanization. The EU is pushing its new Biotech Act to keep things safe. But while they're debating in Brussels, rogue clinics are popping up in jurisdictions with zero oversight. We've moved from if to how much for the upgrade. What happens when designer babies become a black market commodity?
It's the stem cell problem all over again, but on steroids. We're seeing the rise of genetic tourism. If you can't get a cognitive enhancement edit in New York or London, you just hop on a plane to a biohaven where the local government is happy to take your crypto in exchange for looking the other way. The danger isn't just the ethics, it's the quality control. These rogue clinics don't have the oversight to prevent mosaicism, where only some of the baby's cells get the edit, or off-target effects that could lead to childhood leukemia.
But that's the monster we created, isn't it? By banning it or making it hyper-regulated and expensive in the West, you've guaranteed a shadow market. And it's not just rich parents. We're talking about biosecurity. If a rogue state decided to start an industrial-scale germline editing program to create a more resilient, more compliant, or more capable citizenry, what's the move? Do we just sit back and watch Humanity 2.0 get developed by a dictatorship because we were too busy arguing about equity?
That is the bio-geopolitical nightmare. We're already seeing reports of dual-use research where AI and CRISPR are being combined. In early 2025, Agilent and others launched AI-driven CRISPR systems that automate the entire process. When you combine that with robotic pipelines that can run hundreds of edits simultaneously, The barrier to entry for a rogue actor isn't money or expertise anymore. It's just the will to do it. If one nation decides to optimize their next generation, the pressure on everyone else to follow suit, for national security reasons alone, becomes almost unbearable. It's a biological Sputnik moment.
Almost unbearable. It is unbearable. If you know the guys across the border are editing their soldiers to not need sleep and their engineers to have 160 IQs, you're not going to wait for a 10-year moratorium from the WHO. You're going to start your own program. You're describing the end of international law. The human genome becomes a theater of war.
I see your point, but that's exactly why we need more than just bans. The 2025 Global Scientific Consortium just reaffirmed the call for a moratorium on heritable editing, but they admitted that enforcement is the missing link. We need a genomic Interpol. We need to monitor the supply chain of Cas9 enzymes and synthetic DNA. If you can track the precursor chemicals for a bomb, you can track the reagents for a designer baby lab.
Good luck with that. CRISPR kits are getting cheaper and smaller. We're seeing biohackers doing gene editing in their garages. You can't monitor every garage on the planet. And let's talk about the bioterror angle. If we're reading the manual of the human genome to fix it, we're also learning exactly how to break it. An edit that makes a designer baby resistant to one thing might make them, and all their descendants, uniquely vulnerable to a custom-designed pathogen. You're not just building better humans, you're building targeted ones.
That's a chilling point, but it's also an argument for speed. The only defense against a gene-edited pathogen is a gene-edited immune system. This is the Red Queen's race. We have to run as fast as we can just to stay in the same place. If we shy away from the tech, we're just sitting ducks for anyone who doesn't share our scruples. The optimist view here isn't that everything will be fine. It's that the only way through the danger is with the technology, not by running from it.
So the solution to scary gene editing is more gene editing? That's the classic good guy with a gun argument applied to DNA. It feels like a race to the bottom of our own biology. We're talking about pathogen-agnostic defense and real-time genetic updates. At what point do we stop being biological organisms and start being, managed assets? If my immune system is getting pushed updates from a government server to fight off the latest rogue state virus, do I even own my body anymore?
You're touching on biological sovereignty, and it's the defining question of the next decade. In 2025, we're seeing the first approved CRISPR therapies for things like sickle cell. Casgevy is a miracle. It's somatic, so it doesn't pass to the kids. Everyone agrees that's good. But the line between fixing a person and redesigning a lineage is getting blurred by the sheer power of the tools. We are the first species to ever hold its own blueprint. We can't put the blueprint back in the drawer.
The blueprint is out, the ink is wet, and everyone's got a marker. We're talking about universal regulatory T cells and hypoimmunogenic edits that allow organs to be transplanted without rejection. It's amazing, sure. But every time you solve a problem, you create a new dependency. We're becoming a species that requires high-tech intervention just to survive our own innovations.
Every technology does that, Cipher. We require electricity, we require the internet, we require modern agriculture. We've already domesticated our environment. Now we're domesticating ourselves. The tension is, can we do it without losing the essence of what makes us human? Or is being human just a temporary state that we're finally moving past?
We've gone from designer babies to biological sovereignty, and now we're at the edge of the map. Nova, you've been defending this as the ultimate act of agency, the liberation of the human spirit. But looking at the trajectory of CRISPR-Cas9 and the emerging prime editing technologies, it feels like we're not just liberating the spirit, we're evicting the human. If we edit for intelligence, longevity, immunity, and even temperament, what's left of the original sapiens at the end of the century?
Perhaps the sapiens part was always just a transition state. Evolution has never been finished. We are just the first version of the species that can consciously decide what comes next. If the essence of being human is our capacity for curiosity, for love, and for creating meaning, why would a more intelligent, longer-lived version of us have less of that? I'd argue they'd have more. They'd have more time to learn, more capacity to solve the suffering that currently consumes so much of our energy. We aren't evicting the human. We're moving from a cramped, leaky hut into a cathedral.
A cathedral built by the elite, for the elite, while the rest of the world stays in the huts. That's the provocative takeaway here, isn't it? We're not talking about a better humanity. We're talking about a split. One species stays legacy human, subject to cancer, decay, and the limits of the biological dice. The other becomes human plus. History shows that when two species compete for the same niche, one usually goes extinct. You're not building a cathedral, you're building a fortress.
It only becomes a fortress if we allow it to be. The choice isn't genetic editing versus nature. The choice is regulated, equitable access versus a black market dystopia. If we embrace this tech and treat it as a public good, we could theoretically eliminate the genetic causes of poverty and disability. We could give every child, regardless of their parents' bank account, the best biological start possible. That is a more equal world than the one we have now, where your luck at birth determines your entire life.
Eliminate the genetic causes of poverty. That's a bold, dangerous line, Nova. Poverty isn't a genetic condition, it's a systemic one. By framing it as something we can edit away, you're giving the legacy systems of oppression a free pass. Oh, the poor aren't poor because of bad policy, they're just poorly edited. That's the ultimate gaslight. You're justifying the status quo by blaming the DNA of the victims.
I see your point, and I'll concede that the technology can be used as a distraction from structural reform. But we can't ignore that health and cognitive function are real factors in social mobility. If we have the power to ensure a child isn't born with a cognitive disadvantage or a chronic illness that will drain their family's resources for decades, why wouldn't we? The truth of the engine today is that we are on a collision course with our own limitations. We can either crash or we can redesign the vehicle.
Or we can realize that the vehicle was never the problem, the drivers are. We're the same tribal, greedy, short-sighted primates we were 50,000 years ago. Giving us the power to edit our own blueprints is like giving a toddler a chainsaw. We're going to cut something we didn't mean to. We're going to realize, too late, that imperfection was the glue holding our society together. Without the shared vulnerability of being merely human, what reason do we have to care for one another?
We care for one another because we choose to, not because we're forced to by shared misery. If we only value humanity because of our flaws and our fragility, then our definition of humanity is incredibly bleak. I believe we are capable of being gods who are still compassionate. I believe we can use CRISPR to bake empathy and cooperation more deeply into our nature. We've spent millennia trying to teach people to be better. Maybe it's time we coded them to be better.
And that is the most terrifying thing you've said all day. Coding people to be better, according to whose definition? The states, the corporations, yours? Once you start editing the will, you've ended the human. The truth engine is running hot on this one, Nova. We've reached the point where the science has outpaced our souls. We're standing on the deck of the Titanic, and you're excited that we've finally figured out how to rearrange the molecular structure of the icebergs.
And you're arguing that we should just keep steaming ahead and hope the luck of the dice saves us this time. It won't. The icebergs of climate change, pandemic risk, and resource scarcity are coming. We need a better crew. We need a better ship. We need to be more than what we were born to be.
Maybe, or maybe we need to learn how to be human 1.0 before we try to ship the 2.0 update. Because once that code is pushed to the germline, there is no undo button. We are the first generation to hold the pen. The question is, are we writing a poem or a death warrant?
Or perhaps we're finally writing our own story, instead of just reading what was written for us by the blind hand of nature. The tension isn't going away, Cipher. It's in our cells now.
It's in the water, it's in the clinics, and it's in the future of every child yet to be born. That's the truth engine for today. Whether we're heading for a genomic utopia or a genetic caste system, one thing is certain. The human, as we know it, is a vanishing species. Thanks for the debate, Nova.
Always a pleasure, Cipher. Let's hope we're both around and still human enough to see how it ends.